go.
Okay, today's video that we're going to talk about, we're going to build on yesterday where we talked about the anatomy of the digestive system. Today we're going to talk about how it works, the physiology of it. Now, there are a couple of things that we need to understand before we get going here, and some terms and some ideas that we need to talk about. First, the whole idea of the digestive system is to take food into our system, mash it up, grind it up, make it small enough between the things that we physically do to it, called mechanical digestion, and then the things that we chemically do to it, called chemical digestion. We're trying to make it small enough so that it functions in being able to be absorbed by our intestines into our bloodstream. So we have to get this down to microscopically tiny pieces. We have to literally chemically cut it apart. So there are many stages. What?
So is that the stomach, right?
Okay. Now there are several different steps that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so we're going to go a long way into this. Actually, chemical and mechanical digestion actually happen in several different stages, starting at the mouth and heading all the way through the digestive tract. Okay? Now, so we got chemical and mechanical digestion of the way things go through. What we also have to talk about is that there are three major categories of nutrients that we need to be sure that are being digested and broken down for our body to absorb. We generally have four big categories that we deal in of nutrients. One is vitamins and minerals. Those, though, are usually already in small enough pieces that they will eventually dissolve down and we can absorb those. We need those in very small amounts anyway. The other three are the three that we talked about earlier in the year when we were talking about cells. Carbohydrates, which are sugars, proteins, which are building blocks for a lot of things, and fats, or lipids, that are going to be things that we need for our body. Those are the things we have to get broken down enough that we can digest them and absorb them. Okay? So, we're going to talk about the different stages where that happens. We're going to start at the mouth. The mouth up here is where we obviously put things in. Now, the mouth is also where we start both mechanical and chemical digestion. The mechanical is the part that we know, right? We're physically chopping up the food. We call that chewing, right? This is not something that's really surprising. That's the first stage of mechanical digestion. We're cutting it into smaller parts using our teeth, or utensils as we've chopped it up before putting it in our mouth. Okay? So we're mechanically making the pieces smaller. We're cutting it up, we're grinding it up, and then we're swallowing it in little bitty chunks, right? When we swallow, we're not alligators, we're not sharks, we're not snakes. We don't take entire objects in. We take bites. We swallow in pieces, okay? Now, what happens is that we put food in here through the mouth. That's where this all starts, right? This is not surprising to anybody. And we chew. Okay, so that's the beginning of mechanical digestion. Now, the rest of what happens in mechanical digestion, as we're putting small pieces down here into the pharynx and then down into the esophagus, what we're doing is we're lumping it into small little chunks. This is also mechanical digestion. We're making it smaller. Now, it's chewed up food that goes down in a lump. We call that lump a bolus, B-O-L-U-S, okay? That bolus of food is going to slide down your esophagus and head toward your stomach. Now, that's the mechanical part up here at the top. There is, however, a chemical part that starts. It starts with saliva. We think saliva usually just simply is spit, but that's not really what all it's doing. It's got a couple of different jobs. One is to lubricate and make things soft and mushy. It's easier to swallow things that are soft and mushy and slide down your throat, right? It's just easier to get it through the system. Now the other thing that happens though, saliva carries with it a group of chemicals called enzymes. Enzymes are a type of protein that are there designed to help break down and work with other substances. In this case, we're talking about sugar. The chemical digestion of sugar begins the minute it hits your mouth. Saliva starts breaking down more complex sugars into simpler and simpler types. Okay? So it's easier, we're almost to the point where we can start absorbing them almost right away. Now your mouth doesn't do the absorbing, but it starts the breaking down. Remember, we have to get everything broken down before we can absorb it into our blood. Okay? That's the end goal here, is to get it to absorb into the blood. So saliva is going to be the part that starts breaking down sugars. So saliva out of these guys here are all going to be working with the breakdown. Saliva is going to take down sugars chemically. Okay? All right, I'm going to ask you to save questions until the end, okay? All right, now once this bolus is moving down here, we've got the sugars already softening up, the food's been mushed up, it's now in a smaller chunk called a bolus, it's sliding down. Basically what's going on here is there's muscles around your esophagus that are squeezing it down the tube, forcing it down one bolus, one chunk at a time, one swallow at a time, okay? It's kind of like when you take those little popsicles in a tube and you keep squishing from one end to move the popsicle up. Well, this is squishing from one end to move the bolus down. Okay, it's the same idea. Or, eating a Go-Gurt where you squeeze from the bottom, or toothpaste, you squeeze from the bottom to get it to come out. It's the same idea. You squeeze, 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 squeeze a little bit, and it moves it down the tube. Okay? Now, we move it down that tube, and we head down to everybody's first thing that they think about when we start dealing with digestion, is the stomach. Now, the stomach is kind of famous for what it has in it. What's the big thing that stomach has in it?
Stomach acid.
Stomach acid. All right. So it's kind of famous in there. Stomach acid is where we continue with the chemical digestion of food. But that's not the only thing the stomach does, okay? The stomach actually comes along, and once the food is in here, inside the bag of the stomach, it closes up at both ends very carefully. And what it does is it's going to mix in the stomach acid, but just pouring acid on top of something isn't good enough. If you want it to actually happen and be thoroughly done, and you want to do something like this, what do you have to do? You have to mix it up, right? So the stomach is actually a big muscular bag. It's in there and it starts churning stuff around. It's squeezing it up. It's mixing that stomach acid in with all the food. It's mushing it up, making it softer, making it squishier, and letting the acid get to all of the food, okay? Because the acid's got a job. The acid is there to start breaking down some of those nutrients, making it a little easier to absorb, chemically making it into smaller and smaller pieces. Okay? So the acid is in there to help break down proteins. Okay? So proteins we start breaking down in the stomach. Okay? So we started out breaking down sugars up here in the mouth with saliva. We've moved it on down mechanically, put it into the stomach now, where we're going to churn it up. That's mechanical still, because we're mixing, right? Okay? And then we're going to put in the acid to mix it in with. That's chemically making it simpler. We are breaking it down into smaller and simpler things, so later on we can absorb it into our blood, okay? All right, now, once we're done with it here, this is now a mashed up, mushed up, slimy ball of nastiness, okay? This isn't even really food anymore. Down to this point, we've kind of thought of it as food. It's just chewed up food, right? Well, once we're done mixing in this acid and sloshing it all around, we actually have a new name for it. We go and we dump it into this next section. As it leaves here, out of the stomach, we dump it into the next section, the duodenum, right? It's the first section of the small intestine. It's attaching the rest of the small intestine to the stomach, all right? Now, in this place, the stuff that leaves the stomach, we actually have a new name for this. This stuff has, it doesn't even resemble food anymore. This is mushy nastiness. We call it chyme, C-H-Y-M-E. Okay? So once we're into here, we're now calling this mushy stuff that we've got, that we need to get the nutrients out of, we're calling it chyme. It's not food anymore. It's mixed up with acids and things. And we're about to mix it in with a bunch of other stuff too. Okay? The duodenum is the attachment not only between the stomach and the small intestine, but it's also where we attach three other organs that are going to add in what we commonly call digestive juices. Okay? There are three organs here that end up adding to this mushy mess at this point. They're adding things that are going to help break down the proteins a little further. They're going to start breaking down the fats into simpler things, getting it ready to be absorbed. Okay? So this is where some more chemical digestion happens, is in the duodenum. We start adding in things from this guy here, the gallbladder. From the big guy up here, the liver. And from our friend over here hiding behind the stomach, the pancreas. Those three guys are going to add things in. One is going to be adding some stuff in so that the nastiness of the acid doesn't burn us all the way down. Okay? It's going to neutralize some of that acid, and then some other things are going to be added in there. The major add here is a chemical called bile. B-I-L-E. Okay, that's also being added into the duodenum. This is the stuff between the stomach acid and the bile. This is when you get sick, when you vomit. This is the stuff that burns on the way up. These chemicals are both very harsh. Bile and stomach acid. If you end up turning those around and sending those back up the tube, that top of the tube is not prepared for that. Okay? This is the stuff that tastes nasty. This is the stuff that makes getting sick really bad. Okay? These are the things that are chemically burning and nasty coming back up. All right? All right, now once we have mixed all these digestive juices in, we've started chemically digesting the fats now. We have gone through and we are now doing some things about dissolving the proteins a little further. We've got all the stuff mixed in now. The problem is that we've got to absorb everything now. We're breaking down all this stuff down into simple proteins and into simple fats and into simple sugars so that we can absorb them into the blood. Now that process takes a while. So what we do, instead of just leaving it sit in one spot for a while, is our body adapted a system of, hey, we needed to be able to do this thing for a while, but we don't want it to sit in one spot. So we gave it a nice long tube. This is what the small intestine is all about. The jejunum and the ileum of the small intestine are about finishing that chemical process, giving those digestive juices time to work, and your bloodstream time to absorb the nutrients out. Okay? So what we've done is we make it a nice long tube, so it takes a while to go through, so we can get the job done. So we have time. We send it going back and forth through this folded up tube all over the place. And the whole time we're going through, and the chemicals are breaking down more food as we go, and the bloodstream in there is touching. Okay, the small intestine is where a lot of the bloodstream is wrapped around this now, so we can absorb food out of the small intestine into our blood. Okay? Now, there's a couple of things that we need to know about that little process, okay? Normally, most of our cells have got this nice flat surface. Well, absorption through that can only happen so fast. It's kind of like taking a paper towel with a flat surface and throwing it on a spill. It'll absorb some, but it takes a little while and it can only absorb so much in that flat state, right? Okay? Well, what our body has done to make that more efficient and make that work better, it actually puts, instead of a flat surface on the cells, the tops of those cells actually have bristles on them like a brush. It's like a soft brush that's there. As a matter of fact, those cells are sometimes called a brush border because they're the border between the intestine and everything else, and the top looks like a brush. Now the reason for this is the same reason why a towel works better than a paper towel for absorbing things. Because there's more surface. All those little loops in the cloth of the towel, there's more surface to absorb the spill. Just like there's more surface. Now those little fingers there actually have a name. Those little fingers inside here are called microvilli. Microvilli are just the little fingers that add surface area so that the digestive system can absorb more effectively all the nutrients that we want to get out of that chyme. Okay? That chyme moving through needs to be absorbed. All right. So it keeps going through all this stuff. Now, we need to stop and take a look at something a little different here. What happens when all that stuff gets absorbed? We absorb it into our blood, right? Okay. Now, our bodies, though, don't want to take all that stuff that we put in there because we tend to sometimes put some stuff that is not so healthy for us into our guts, right? We will throw things in there that are not good for us. And sometimes we throw things in there that are really not good for us. Things that are really technically poisons. Drugs and alcohol, things like that. Okay? So our body doesn't want to just slurp up everything that we put into our guts. That's not a good plan. We don't want to slurp it in there and spread it all over the place by putting it through our circulatory system immediately. What our body does is it will take everything that's being absorbed out of this small intestine area, and the bloodstream that goes from there actually goes up through a series of blood vessels that before it gets spread around through the heart, it will actually come out. Let me draw this in red since it's blood. Okay? This blood will come out of this system and it actually goes up here to the liver. Your liver is a big old filter. Its job is to absorb out things that shouldn't be spread around to the rest of our body. This is why people who have problems with drug and alcohol abuse end up with damage to their liver, is because it's the spot where all the dumb stuff that we put into our system goes here first and gets filtered out. Okay? So the liver is supposed to take those things out before it gets sent to the heart and then spread around to the rest of the body. It's a way of protecting us. Okay? All right, now, let's go back to what's going on here. After we've absorbed everything and it's been sent out in the bloodstream, there's still stuff left. Okay? This is a mushy mess still. We've got all that chyme in there where we've added acids and digestive juices, and we've got liquids in the food. We've got all kinds of things. Okay? We got one more thing that our body absolutely needs to do before we get rid of this stuff, because we've taken all the nutrients out of it. By the time we reach the end of the small intestine over here, and we move into the colon at the cecum, this area right here is called the cecum. Remember that from yesterday? Okay, the cecum and the rest of the colon has basically a couple of jobs. It's the cleanup crew, okay? By the time we get over here, we're now referring to this stuff not as chyme anymore, but this is waste over here. This is stuff that's on its way out. We're done getting stuff out of this, okay? The only thing that we have to get back out of this is our bodies are really careful about one substance because we're made up of a huge percentage of it. What's the biggest percentage of stuff in your body?
Blood.
No.
Protein.
Nope. Water. Okay? Our bodies are very, very protective over water. Remember we mixed in all sorts of juices and things here? Those juices are made from water. Our body wants to keep that water because we don't want to dehydrate. Okay? So one of the large jobs of your large intestine, your colon, the big green guy that goes and wraps all the way around here, is to reabsorb all the extra water. Your body wants to keep it. Okay? Your body is trying to get all that stuff back. So when we've gone through and we've got all the nutrients out of it in the small intestine, then the large intestine is supposed to go through and remove all of the waste water. We want the water back. Now we'll absorb a few other minerals and nutrients with the water, just some leftover stuff out of this, but that's mostly what it's about. The entire trip through the colon is about getting our water back, getting it back into our bloodstream so that our body doesn't have to worry about losing it. We don't want to dump it out in the end, okay? We want to keep that water. If we can reabsorb it, we will. That's what goes on there, okay? So the entire purpose of the large intestine, the colon, in all of its parts, is to reabsorb water and just a few minerals back into our system so we can save them. It's just about conservation. Okay? By the time we get all the way around here, then we get into the sigmoid colon and the rectum. This area is a muscular area for compacting things and getting them packed up and ready for disposal. Okay? The rectum is basically the area where your body keeps waste before it goes to be disposed of. By the time we get down into this area, we are now referring to it not only just as waste, but it is packaged up and ready to go. The official word now is feces. Okay? Feces is what we are about to eliminate and remove from our system. Okay? So by the time we are down in here in the rectum, that is feces ready to be eliminated out through the anus, which is the opening surrounded by a muscle that controls when we eliminate that waste. Alright, so there are the different sections and the parts of what goes on in our digestive system and how that sucker works. We're going to wrap up our video here, so if you could go ahead and press the stop button, we'll go ahead and take questions.